Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt in the ReliefFactor.com studio. On the 2nd of July, 2019, I'm honored to have the former United States Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, join me. He's the author of a brand new book, which is a must-read, Inside the Five-Sided Box. It is a 5-star read, and everyone who listens to this show knows I've interviewed former Secretary of Defense and Vice President Cheney, former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, former Secretary of Defense Gates. Their books are all very good. This is actually better. Secretary Ash Carter, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
You and I have a friend in Dan Pond, and he's told me for a long time that you're one of the serious people, and I kind of had that confirmed for me when you began the book on acquisition controversies. Strong move. Your publisher must have scratched their head a little bit, though.
Well, they did, but they got it after a while. It's not, as you say, a Washington memoir. It's not about me. It's not a kiss and tell book. It's an executive guide to the Pentagon. And one of the things the Pentagon does is, of course, spend $750 billion of our money every year on its most solemn mission. So I thought that that was as good a place to start as any, and it would give people a little flavor of what the book is about, which is to take them inside the Pentagon and tell them how the largest managerial job in the world works.
It is fascinating on so many. I'm a civilian that knows a little bit about this. The danger of knowing a little bit is complete when it comes to the Pentagon. So I've always try to be humble about this. And that's why I found Inside the Five-Sided Box to be so valuable on so many levels. There's stuff I know, like chain of command, but there's stuff I don't know. And I want to go through it with you fairly carefully. But let's go to what, if I were your publisher, I would have made sure you started the book with, but you probably rejected it. Page 202, you write, one more nightmare scenario that novelists and filmmakers have toyed with is the idea of a mentally disabled president deciding to launch a nuclear attack. But I personally discount the likelihood of such a scenario ever coming to pass. The military code of justice requires troops to refuse to follow orders they know are illegal. And the high-ranking leaders, civilian and military, who surround every president and would be aware of his intentions are overwhelmingly likely to be sensible, ethical, and strong-willed individuals. I can't believe they would robotically follow the unlawful orders of a clearly deranged president and thereby condemn an unprecedented number of human beings to needless deaths. You really are putting a big downer on the Dr. Strangelove scenarios, Ash Carter.
Well, I think it's really true. In all my experience and all the years going back to Caspar Weinberger when Ronald Reagan was president, first of all, presidents have all been very serious themselves. And I have no reason to believe the current one wouldn't be serious in a matter as grave as this. But it is true that there isn't a big red button on the president's desk. Orders have to filter down the chain of command. Everybody at lower echelons understands that a lawful order is the only thing that needs to be obeyed, and there'd be plenty of time for discussion and give and take. Every time I have seen exercises, and the very first ones I read about predated my time in the Pentagon, but they were in my safe when I got there in 1981, and they were Jimmy Carter's exercises. And they were lengthy and deep and had a lot of discussion. Also, remember, Hugh, and you know this very well from your own knowledge in your own service, we have, and we spend a lot of money on it, and by the way, need to, a deterrent force that is survivable, meaning that we can absorb in Russian, which is the most stressing kind of attack, and take our time and think about how we're going to respond. We spend money to have that capability. We don't need to rush it. And so the first thing that I would say to a president, and I intended to, was, Mr. President, what I need you to do now is survive. Protect yourself. I'll find you, and then you can decide how you want to respond. But you don't need to make a decision in the first half hour of a nuclear war. You can take your time. We can talk about it. You can think about it. That's why we invest all that money, Hugh, in having an arsenal that can withstand an attack.
It's a brilliant explanation for the civilian population who's interested as to why we have the triad. And, I ask questions about the triad of every candidate who ever comes on. I did it in the debates in 2016. It matters so much, and you put a lot of time into that. I got to ask you up front, policy question, confront. A lot of people tell me we've just got to move to a two-legged triad, air and sea, and give up on the ICBMs. It's too expensive to modernize. They're targeted too easily with drones. What do you think about that, Ash Carter?
I'm still in favor of recapitalizing the ICBMs. Here's how it goes, the three legs. Submarines you have to have, Hugh, because as you know, they're the thing that is absolutely sure to survive because they can hide underwater, and they're, for the foreseeable future, they won't be able to be found in advance. Bombers we have anyway because we use them for other purposes. So they're going to be there no matter what. That leaves the ICBM. ICBMs are cheap once you buy them. They're cheap to maintain. And if the missile silos, not just the missiles, but the missile silos we have in the Midwest themselves don't need replacement, I think it's going to be an easy decision. I'm hoping it won't require going out there and pouring a whole lot of concrete. That will be costlier and will entail more discussion. But still, I'm in favor of it. The ICBMs have some advantages. And listen, people tend to forget because nuclear war is, thank God, not in the headlines every day. But it is the most solemn and serious mission. It's the bedrock of our security.
It is, and what you're doing right now is explaining that. You mentioned in the book that you spent a lot of time thinking about communications and the Secretary of Defense and the professionalism of people like Courtney Kluber over there at the Pentagon, people who really understand it. But I once had Rummy on, and I said, you haven't taken any time at all, this was when he was SecDef, to talk to me, and I'm one of the friendlies. What's wrong with you? And he said, I'm too busy to talk to the media. I wonder, Secretary Carter, if all the former secretaries of defense, and Secretary Mattis would never talk to me, ought to get together and inform their successors. They've really got to talk to the serious media, if not the general media, because they don't actually, these issues do not get explored very often.
Well, that's good advice. And, you've known them all, and I've known them all too. Most of them are not press hounds in any way at all. They're serious. And they're working on their mission every day. But it is part of the job, and I didn't like it. Wasn't always very good at it, but I did understand it was part of my mission. By the way, I'm sorry having this conversation now. We didn't talk then. By the way, we all do talk among ourselves, and we've all been friends. There's kind of a brotherhood among former secretaries. And one thing I don't do, and none of them ever did when I was secretary, was talk about them or make public comments about what they're doing. They'd call me up, I'd call them up, give them private advice. It's a lonely job. And the other people who have had it have been were nice enough to me when I was secretary to be supportive. And I'm never, ever critical in public. I never would dream of being that.
It's clear there's a club of former SecDefs, and I'm glad to hear that. It's an interesting job because a lot of people think they have it that don't have it. There's a great anecdote in Inside the Five-Sided Box when Ben Rhodes table drops on you something about Gitmo, and you confront him and say, don't ever do that again. Did that end the table dropping?
Yeah, it did for me. It wasn't Rhodes, by the way.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, I know. It might have made a better story, but it wasn't him. But table dropping, just so everybody knows, means putting down in front of everybody in the Situation Room a piece of paper that the cabinet members have never had a chance to see before. And when I had that done to me, I just crumpled it up and threw it out. You don't go in front of the president unprepared. It's unreasonable to me. It's unreasonable in my department. It's unreasonable to the president of the United States. They're trying to trap you. It's a cheap staffer trick.
I love that anecdote, and I'll accept your word that it wasn't Ben Rhodes, but I got to say, Secretary Kerry was my guest, and I may be the only guy in Washington who read every page of his memoir. He mentioned Ben Rhodes once in his memoir. You named Ben Rhodes once in your memoir. Ben Rhodes has a whole book out on my shelf out there, which I haven't cracked yet, and I like to joke he's the Metternich of MSNBC. What happened to the NSC staff during the Obama years that they grew so possessive of line of command authority that they do not possess?
Yeah, well, they don't have it. And my predecessors complained about that. I don't complain about it, not because it wasn't a danger to the office of the Secretary of Defense and to good order and discipline in defense, but because I traced it to the president's own unease with the work that we were doing for him. And what I tried to do with President Obama, who was a demanding guy, all the people I've known have been demanding, was make sure that I had looked at, let's say, Hewitt, a hostage rescue mission or a night raid or a war plan, that I had looked at it through his eyes and tried to put myself in his shoes, which means asking yourself the kinds of questions that you can't expect our military staff, excellent as they are, to have thought of. These are the guys who know where every helicopter is going to go, every tank or airplane is going to be in the sky. That's what they're really good at. When it comes to questions like, well, what are we going to do with these guys when we capture them? That's the kind of question that the president expected me to have thought through first. And if I could win his confidence that I had done that, then he wouldn't do what any boss will do if they don't have confidence in what you give them, which is turn to their own staff and say, hey, you better check this. I didn't want to be checked.
Yeah, the explanation you provide of how you earned that trust so the president would eventually delegate more is worth reading no matter who you are and who you work for, because it's applicable across silos, civilian and military. Page 185, you talk about the chain of command, and I want to quote this because it's so important. My first priority was to update myself when you became SecDef about ongoing military operations, the workings of the White House, and the flow of orders along the chain of command. I quickly perceived some glaring deficiencies in the way things had come to be managed between the SecDef staff and the president's staff. I did not know when or how these weaknesses had come to be a part of the department's standard operating procedures, but I knew they had to be remedied if I was going to play the role of secretary that I intended and that I believed the president needed and wanted. It turned out that sometime in the past, the NSC staff had begun requiring COCOMs, those are combatant commander orders, to submit their weekly summaries of what they're up to the White House staff at the same time they went to the SecDef. When I learned of this practice, I forbade it immediately. Another outrage, from my point of view, was it had become common for the NSC staff members or Susan Rice or John Kerry to call the COCOMs without asking my permission. So do you think that those practices are dead forever because they're really terrible ideas?
They are terrible ideas, and I'm sorry to say I don't think they are dead. I think every Secretary of Defense is going to have to hold that line. It's the natural tendency of White House staffs, and particularly soon after a transition. I wasn't Secretary of Defense soon after Obama's transition, but I've seen other transitions. And, the White House is immediately staffed or with people who've been part of the campaign who are full of themselves, and they'll think nothing of bossing around or trying to boss around the professional military. That's not how we do something as grave as defend the country. And the Secretary of Defense, one of his jobs is to push back on that and protect the institution and its procedures from abuse. It's supposed to listen to the president and obey the president's commands only. You don't need to listen to all these people who've been part of campaigns.
I don't think anyone was ever going to roll General Mattis or you, a 30-plus, 40-plus year veteran of the Pentagon. I wonder, though, when Acting Secretary Shanahan was there, or whether right now I think it's Acting Secretary Spencer and it's, Army Secretary Esper has been nominated. This is a period of institutional weakness for the Department of Defense. And you got some strong characters. They're friends of mine. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, the National Security Advisor, John Bolton. Is this a perilous time for the authority of DOD and the secretaries, given the weakness of the acting position?
Well, it'd be better if there were a secretary who was confirmed and who was listened to by the president. Reading between the lines of Jim Mattis's really eloquent resignation letter, by the way, he's been a friend of mine for 25 years, was the complaint that he didn't seem to be listened to. And so it's not just a matter of having a secretary that's confirmed and is the president's choice, but one he'll listen to also. Internally in the Pentagon, there's kind of good news and bad news. The good news is that there's a deep bench in defense. We have a deep keel, and the place will keep on going without a leader. And we have the professional uniformed cadre there, which is excellent, absolutely excellent. And so a lot of things will go on just fine. What you won't have is somebody leading the department into the future. And since war is going to change and we need to continue to be the best, not having someone who is taking the place forward, it won't fall back easily because it's strong and it's professional. But it's not going to be led into the future without a leader, and I do worry about that.
Hey, let me take a moment to also thank Stephanie Carter, your spouse, who would often travel with you. I was unaware she would travel with you to combat zones and was actually more important for the morale of the troops than you were. And that takes a lot. I don't know that many people recognize that. I know that other spouses, Susan Pompeo, I just know other spouses out there do this. And I don't think anyone ever gives them props for doing so. You put it in the book, and I just wanted to say I hope people read that and really realize that the spouses serve along with their active duty military partners.
Well, thanks. I'll tell her that. She had her own job, so she couldn't always go with me. But it's palpable when you're talking to troops and they know mom is watching, because remember, everything is streamed home. If it's your family to their family, it has extra meaning.
Wow.
And that's especially true if you're in a hospital or even worse, at Dover, welcoming back the remains of fallen heroes and the families there. If your spouse is with you and they see that you're all in as a family for them, it means a lot to them.
All right, now we've been nice to each other. Let's touch gloves. Military spending. The Gates budget was supposed to be the baseline. The Obama administration just took it down. And I know you were fighting this, but you're very gentle in the book about this. At one point, you write, over the years, I argued in defense of OCO, the Overseas Contingency Operation Fund, against a series of White House budget directors who opposed it almost as a matter of theological purity. I thought all of them good people who happened to have an unfortunate bee in their bonnet about this issue. The trouble is you lost most of those battles, Secretary Carter. The defense budget got ravaged under late Obama years.
Well, I won all the battles about wartime funding. So just for the record, that's true. And Hugh, the story of budgeting in the Obama years, like in most years, is actually kind of complicated and doesn't fall upon partisan lines quite as clearly as you're suggesting, although in general, Democrats have been less favorable to defense and Republicans have been more favorable. That's definitely true. But during the Obama years, the critical dynamic in Washington wasn't left, right, hawks, doves. It was gridlock. So we never got a budget in 7 out of 8 years I was there. No budget at all. And also, it may not be widely known, but the administration requested more money than we got every year during the Obama administration because the Congress was certainly favorably disposed towards defense. They always are. They're patriotic people. But they were mostly concerned about the deficit. And so we were constantly facing sequester. Relatedly, Dick Cheney, my good friend Dick Cheney, people don't realize, but he presided over the largest sustained decrease in the defense budget of anybody. And that wasn't because Dick wanted to do that. It was because he happened to be there when the wall came down and people thought that it was time to get a peace dividend.
Yeah, the mythical peace dividend.
Circumstances to the larger dynamics in Washington, and it's very rarely hawks versus doves. I will say I do believe in spending enough for our defense. I never did that at the expense of other agencies. I think education is important and infrastructure is important and R&D is important and all that. But national defense is the thing that you have to have because without that, nothing else of meaning in life.
We could spend the rest of our limited time talking about the fact the sequester was there and it was a 1-for-1 deal. The Democrats wanted $1 for every domestic spend for every dollar of Pentagon spending, and that was the gridlock. But let's move to some of the big breakthroughs in this book that I don't think Americans know about. You know what surprised me? That the ONE, the president's authority, has proposed to shoot down airliners in the Secretary of Defense and, if unavailable, the Deputy Secretary of Defense. I've never seen that in print anywhere.
It's true, and the reason is that it happens so fast that you can't expect the president to get on the phone and make a decision that quick. As I said, nuclear retaliation, you don't have to make it a few minutes. There's an airliner heading towards the Capitol Dome. You need to make a decision in minutes. And the secretary and the deputy secretary are always on. They're always connected. So they're the ones that presidents have turned to, starting with President Bush and then President Obama, and said, okay, you do it. Now, it's a no-win situation because if you shoot down an airliner filled with people and it was just a communications outage, that's obviously a terrible thing to have done. On the other hand, if you let a hijacked airliner plow into the Capitol, our beautiful 150-year-old symbol of our country, or into the White House or into the Pentagon, that's bad also. So it was an ugly duty. I didn't like it. I had a few close calls with it. It usually ended up, being a dentist in his Cessna, who was out for a weekend jaunt.
Secretary Carter, I wonder, did you ever consider if OBL, Osama bin Laden, had been a better tactician? The strategy was evil but malevolently genius. But his tactics, his targeting, it was terrible to lose the towers and to lose 3,000 people. But if he had directed 4 missiles, which he controlled, all of them at the White House and the Congress, would the continuity of government been able to reform had he been successful with the surprise and the targeting, and had W been at the White House?
Yes, it would. I'm confident of that. There would be a successor to the president. You may be able to kill the president, either in a war or an assassination. But with the Constitution and the Presidential Succession Act prescribe a devolution of the presidency. So if the president were killed, let us say, in a nuclear war, my job as Secretary of Defense was to find the president. If the elected president hadn't survived, then it was the vice president. And if he was gone too, or she gone too, then you go on to the number 3, who is the Speaker of the House, the President pro tem of the Senate, and then through the cabinet secretaries in the order of the creation of their cabinet departments. We practice that. We keep track of where all the cabinet members are at all times so that we can always find and swear in a successor to the lawful president of the United States, and then take orders from him or her.
And then he or she could reconstitute the government even of a destroyed Congress. All right, now let me go to some less terrible-minded novelist theories into some practical stuff. First of all, you're pretty tough on the Gulf states. They're now fighting Iran and Yemen in a way that I think that the American public don't understand what that proxy war is there. But are they, on the whole, coming around into this new alliance of the willing in the Middle East, which is the Gulf states and Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and to a certain extent Iraq, with Israel to oppose Iranian expansionism? Do you think they've got their act together?
I don't think they quite have their act together, but I'm not somebody who wants to throw them overboard either. They're good partners. They're essential partners. I just don't buy when they tell us that they're doing us a favor by being our friends. They have, sadly, failed to come through for us, especially the Saudis, pretty routinely. But I tried to, when I dealt with Mohammed bin Salman, who's now the effective leader of the place, when he was brand new, try to counsel him, mentor him, if you like the phrase. So I'm in favor of the relationship, but we do need to reset it. They're not doing us any favors. A relationship, whether it's an alliance or a partnership, is a deal between two countries. It's not a favor we do to foreigners. We don't do favors for foreigners. We benefit from having alliances and partnerships with them, so I'm not an alliance basher. But it's a deal. It's a transaction. It's a transaction that's like a long-term human relationship. You don't do it day by day or deal by deal. But, the Saudis go around acting as though they do us a favor. For example, when they buy our weapons, well, that's a transaction. They get good products from us. We get money back. Nobody wins. Everybody wins, but it's an even trade.
Okay, let me turn before we run out of time to China, because you talk about cricket, China, Russia, Iran, Korea, and terrorism. I want to focus on, you reject the Thucydides trap that Graham Allison believes is coming. I agree with you. And the answer to that is Reaganism. It's peace through strength. But how do you rebalance and prevent China breakout with a 280-ship Navy? Do you look back at your Navy shipbuilding acquisition and say, we did not do our job then?
It's not so much a matter to me, Hugh, of ship numbers. It's capability overall. The future of the Navy is not just going to be in hulls. They're important. But the subsurface Navy, electronic warfare, cyber, space, these are going to be the frontiers of naval warfare. Now, we do need the ships, but at the margin, if you're applying the dollar to the Navy, you're going to be doing it to these future capabilities. I should also add unmanned vehicles, drones, as well.
Well, you said the F-35 is the last fighter plane. That's got every fighter pilot I know mad.
Well, it's the last manned fighter plane. That's a prediction, I'm guessing. That won't happen soon because we're just starting to deploy it. But if I cast my eyes 30, 40 years ahead, after the Joint Strike Fighter has lived its life, and say, is it likely at that time that we'll build something like that, a fighter aircraft with a person in it? I think warfare will have changed enough. We'll have something in the air. We'll still be using the air and space for warfare. It'll still be an arena of conflict. But I don't think we'll be building the same things we're building here. We're building now. People need to start planning for that now.
Yeah, are carriers obsolete?
No, they're not. Now, a carrier is going to have a hard time against Russia or China. But remember, that's not all we use a carrier for. We use a carrier for Afghanistan, for Syria, for Iraq. They can't attack or try to sink an aircraft carrier. So there's a lot of value in the carrier fleet, and will be for quite some time. But it just won't be against the high-end opponent, who may well, over time, gain an ability to keep them out of the waters around them because it'll be too unsafe for an aircraft.
Secretary Carter, I got to get through 3 or 4 more big ones. The JCPOA, I don't know if you're a Monty Python fan, but that parrot is dead. But we still have, I went to the Aspen Security Forum last summer. It was a big wake for the JCPOA. You kind of defend the deal, but you also kind of recognize what Richard Haass said last hour. It wasn't long enough. It didn't address ICBMs. There's got to be a better deal out there. Do your friends from the Obama era realize that the JCPOA is dead, dead, dead?
Well, I can't speak for them, but it is. We have to pick ourselves up and move on. It's not going to come back in the form that it had. And you're right. It was not, never could have been a grand bargain with Iran. They're doing too much bad stuff, of which trying to develop nuclear weapons was just one. Now, I was happy to have a verifiable agreement that took that headache off my plate as Secretary of Defense in a way that I could see wouldn't necessarily last forever. That was fine with me, but I never mistook it for a grand bargain with Iran.
Okay, secondly, cyber offense, page 339. You say it was, during your time, a sensitive topic verging on taboo, which was news to me. I know it's been there for a long time. We don't want to talk about it. Mike Pompeyo, when I interviewed him, wouldn't even say when we've used it. We always know when we use our other kinetic forces, and cyber is kinetic in a very real way. Should we be more explicit about when and where we use it?
Yeah, it's a holdover from the old days. I actually issued the first public policy on cyber war, and that was hard to get people to agree to because they didn't know whether they should be talking about it. But a cyber attack, Hugh, is an attack. And you need to be able to cut through the technology. I'm a physicist, as you know, and get to the human meaning of this. If somebody attacks us with cyber, to me, that's an attack.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not a physicist, but that one I get. And it just seems to me that we ought to be talking explicitly about it. Russian interference, page 341. Quote, we never thought enough was being done, you and General Dunford, enough was being done to prepare these actions, either privately or publicly. Political considerations played a significant role. I think this was one of the most politicized sequences, and we're going to find out a lot when the United States Attorney from Connecticut reports back to Attorney General Barr. You bring in Ryan and McConnell and the classic rejoinder that they stopped the president, but really it was up to the president, wasn't it, to do something about this? It's not up to Congress. They never get anything done. I
meant what I said. Not enough was done then. And by the way, not enough has been done since. And if you need proof of that, you only need to look at Vladimir Putin. Does this look like a guy who's been chastised? Does this look like a guy who's been pushed back against? So we have not done enough. What happened back in 2016 was complicated. There was an election campaign going on. That's why Joe Dunford and I were not involved in all aspects of it. And there was no appetite, I think the honest truth is, on either side of the aisle to make an issue of this in the middle of a campaign. And that's understandable. I to try to put the best face on it for everybody involved, Mitch McConnell, Barack Obama, and so forth. They had a lot of respect for the electoral process. And I think there was some feeling that, look, we can get to this later. Let's not make this an issue in our own presidential campaign. I have some respect for that. At the same time, I know Vladimir Putin well. I've known him since 1993. And he is what he is, and he responds to pushback. And we do need to push back. And we didn't then, and we haven't since.
All right. Now, my last question goes to what the civilians like me can learn from the professionals like you in the uniforms. Two things I want people to hear. Number one, I am forced to remind myself, page 217, that in the early hours of a developing situation, at least 20% of what I'm hearing is probably false. And at least one time in four, the level of false information is more like 90%. I think that's transferable to every news organization in the country. Secondly, order, clarity, consistency, the culture of America's military. These are values that could transfer as well. I've never met an officer in the military. I know they exist. There's a bell curve, but I've never met one that couldn't transfer to any job I've ever done in the civilian world. Is it somewhat astonishing to you that we have any unemployment problem for veterans?
It is, but it's a lot better than it used to be. First of all, if I had been Secretary of Defense during Vietnam, Hugh, I don't know what I would have done. I couldn't stand to see our people treated that way. And 10 years ago, when I started to push people to hire veterans, they acted like they were doing me a favor. They'd say, okay, Ash, we're going to hire 2,000, 3,000 employees as a patriotic gesture. And I'd say to them, you don't understand. It's not a patriotic gesture. It's good for you. These people are professional, disciplined, buttoned down, even if they're kids who have been recruits in the years preceding. These are kids who are going to get their butts out of bed. They're not overweight. They'll work hard. They know how to lead and be organized. These are fine employees. And the whole thing turned around in the course of 10 years. And employers started thanking me for our people and not the other way around. And by the way, it does create one managerial problem for the Secretary of Defense.
They leave.
They're hiring away my people.
They leave, especially at the middle ranks. When they hit major or lieutenant commander, they start looking at, do I go 20? And those 10 years are invaluable to us. Let me close with a political question. You make it very clear that Robert Gates, who is a great American, and I think everyone recognizes that, I got to play for you a little quote. He's talking to Margaret Brennan, but you also recognize Joe Biden is an old friend of yours, and Dr. Jill Biden of Stephanie's and yours. Here is Margaret Brennan talking to Robert Gates.
Still, I think he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Would he be an effective commander-in-chief?
I don't know. I think I stand by that statement.
Okay, so Secretary Carter, he stands by that statement. What do you think about Vice President Biden as the commander-in-chief?
Well, he is a friend of mine. He's a family friend of mine, and he's a wonderful guy. I'm not going to say anything, Hugh. This is just my practice about future candidates, potential candidates for president. I have nothing to do with campaigns. I have no expertise. He and his wife will remain friends of ours. I don't intend to be any part of any presidential campaign at all. I don't think it's proper for a former Secretary of Defense to do that. On top of that, I don't have any expertise in it.
All right, so we will come back after, if he is CNC, and talk about it. Let me congratulate you on Inside the Five-Sided Box. It's a wonderful book. I hope every civilian reads it, and I'll bet you every junior officer in the United States military has already been assigned it by their commander to go and read this, and I appreciate it. I hope I meet you in person sometime, Secretary Carter. Thank you for years and years of service in the Pentagon.
Likewise. Thanks for your own service, Hugh.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.